It is satisfied with the blood of those fated men, staining the house of the forces with a deep crimson blood. Black becomes the sunlight in the following summers, but the weather is dangerous. Do you still want to know? And what? Everything in life has a beginning and an end. Sometimes the end of one thing is the beginning of another. In Norse mythology, this is called Ragnarok, the final fate of the gods, and the greatest things always start from the smallest things. Ragnarok is no different. It begins with three famous events in Norse mythology: the birth of Loki's three children, the death of Balder, and Fimbulwinter. Loki's infamous children, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, were mentioned in the previous video. Now we move to the next event, the death of Balder. Balder, or Balder in many versions, is the god of light, son of Odin and Frigga. The most famous story about Balder is his own death. Balder was a beloved god, cherished by everyone. His smile was enough to bring joy to all. But Loki didn't like how everyone adored Balder. In fact, he hated him. One fine day, Balder had a dream where he saw his own death. Being a god, if you dream something, it's 99% likely to come true. Balder told Odin and Frigga about his dream. Seeing their beloved son so worried, they became restless. Odin set off to find the cause of these nightmares. He called himself the Wanderer, son of the warrior. He traveled east and met an ancient prophetic woman. From the prophet's mouth, Odin learned that the nightmare was destined to come true, and Helheim awaited it. Odin asked who would kill Balder, who would mourn him, and who would avenge him. The prophet's answers shocked Odin every time. It was then that the prophet realized the Wanderer wasn't just any traveler, it was Odin. And more shockingly, the prophet was Angrboda, Loki's former lover. Angrboda mocked Odin and advised him to go home, because once Loki escapes his chains, the world will end. Odin was confused, for Loki was already free, not bound at all. Though puzzled, Odin could find no further answers, so he returned home. When he got back, Odin didn't tell Frigga anything. Frigga, worried for her son, went around making everything swear not to harm Balder. She made water, fire, stone, iron, and even illness swear an oath. Everything agreed because who wouldn't love Balder? The only thing Frigga didn't make swear was mistletoe because it was too small. Back at the palace, Frigga shared with everyone what she had done, confident nothing could harm Balder. When people expressed doubt, Frigga threw a stone at Balder and it flew away. The gods around saw this and began throwing their weapons at Balder. Thor even hurled his spiked hammer at his half-brother. At that moment, everyone was having fun, but two weren't. One was Loki. Loki disguised himself as an old woman to speak with Frigga and learned that she hadn't made mistletoe swear. Immediately, he headed west to Valhalla, where there was a large mistletoe tree, and from it, he created a poison. The second person unhappy in the gathering was Balder's blind brother, Hod. Hod was strong but blind. While everyone cheered Balder, Hod didn't know how to get attention. That's when Loki appeared, handed Hod an arrow, and promised to show him where Balder was so the blind god could join in. Hod, grateful for Loki's help, shot the arrow at Balder. But no one cheered for Hod because Balder died from the arrow. The arrow, of course, was made of mistletoe. Because his death was an accident, Balder went to Helheim. Odin sent a messenger to Helheim to ask for Balder's return. Hel, upon hearing Odin's request, gave a condition. If everyone weeps for Balder, he will be revived. The messenger returned to Odin, who sent people everywhere to ask others to cry for Balder. But Loki, disguised as the giantess Thok, went into a mountain and refused to cry. After a while, Loki returned to Asgard full of confidence. Thinking he was Odin's blood brother and immune to punishment, he drunkenly challenged and mocked the gods. His crime against Balder severed all ties between Loki and the gods of Asgard. Loki had to flee to escape their wrath. He ran to a high mountain and built himself a house on top. The house had 4 doors to watch all directions. By day, Loki turned into a salmon and hid under a waterfall near his house. By night, he wove fishnets to survive. But Odin, sitting on his high throne, saw everything and immediately sent the gods after Loki. When the gods arrived, Loki threw his fishnet into the fire and transformed into a salmon to escape. The gods, knowing Loki had turned into a fish, wove a new net and caught him. Loki almost escaped, but Thor grabbed his tail and caught him. From then on, salmon had very thin tails. After Loki was captured, Ali and Nari, his children, begged the gods not to harm their father. Loki's charges included causing Hod to kill Balder, and Hod was then killed as punishment. To punish Loki, Odin transformed Ali into a ferocious wolf. Nari was killed by the wolf, his throat ripped out and his entrails scattered on the rocks, but he never cried out. Like father, like son. Loki was then taken to a dark cave, bound with his own son's intestines. The gods turned Nari's intestines into chains, rendering Loki immobile. Skadi, the daughter of the giant Thiazi, brought a venomous snake and tied it above Loki's head. Each day, the snake's venom dripped onto Loki's head, causing unbearable pain. Sigyn, Loki's wife, helped by catching the venom in a bowl. But whenever the bowl filled, Sigyn had to pour the venom away, leaving Loki to suffer the full pain again. Loki would writhe in agony, shaking the earth. This, according to Norse mythology, explained earthquakes. In mythology, those who try to outsmart the gods are always punished cruelly. In Greek mythology, Prometheus was chained to a rock, his liver eaten by an eagle daily, only for it to grow back and be eaten again. This was his punishment for bringing fire to mankind. Or Sisyphus, who was considered smarter than the gods, after tricking the gods multiple times, was condemned to roll a boulder up a mountain for eternity, only for it to roll back down again and again. The death of Balder plunged the world into darkness as the warmth and light disappeared. Crops failed to grow and winter began to creep in. Humanity was forced to endure hunger and cold, growing increasingly angry. Wars broke out, and blood relatives fought over wealth. Brothers fought and killed each other, and the children of sisters defiled their family ties. The world grew harsh and prostitution spread. The age of axes, the age of swords, shields torn apart, the age of wind, the age of wolves. Before the world descended into chaos, no one would show mercy to another. This was the third sign of Ragnarok, Fimbulvetur. Fimbulvetur is 3 consecutive harsh winters. It is believed that Skoll and Hati, the 2 wolves born of Fenrir and the wolf witch in the Yarnvit forest, chased and killed the sun and moon. Without the sun or the moon, darkness blanketed the sky like ash, fog filling the air. Snow fell from every direction, combining with the bitter winds, colder than anything ever known. The cold was so intense it caused pain with every breath, freezing tears in one's eyes. There was no spring, summer, or autumn, only an endless winter. Not exactly a chill vibe. In the first winter, the rooster Fjalar in the forest of Galgvíkr in Jotunheim would crow. The giant Egthir would strum his lyre, singing of the world's end. In the second winter, massive human wars would rage, and an unnamed rooster with blood-red feathers would crow in Helheim, signaling to the dead the start of Ragnarok. In the third winter, 100 days before Ragnarok, the rooster Gullinkambi, with golden feathers like the sun, would crow atop Valhalla's palace in Asgard, signaling the gods. Then came the disasters. Terrifying earthquakes shook the very earth, mountains crumbling. Mountain ranges would tremble and collapse. Trees would fall, and wherever humans lived, there would be ruins. These earthquakes were so powerful that every chain and rope in existence would snap. Fenrir, having broken free of Gleipnir, opened its mouth wide enough to touch the sky with its upper jaw and the earth with its lower jaw. Its eyes and nostrils spewed flames, incinerating everything in its path. Nothing was beyond its reach. Nothing could survive its destruction. In Midgard, endless floods occurred. The sea rose, flooding the land. This was due to Jormungandr, the massive Midgard serpent, twisting in its fury, squeezing the earth tighter and tighter. Its venom mixed with the ocean, killing sea life. It sprayed poison into the sky, creating thick mist that killed birds. This monster's attacks were not just magical, but also physical. Every time it thrashed, all creatures died. The bodies of whales, seals, and sea monsters rotted and drifted in the waves. All creatures who encountered Fenrir and Jormungandr met death. But that was only the beginning of the apocalypse. The sky cracked open, and what appeared was not the sunlight people awaited. Instead, the Muspel people rode through the opening. At the head of this army was Surtur, the fire giant and leader of Muspelheim, described as so tall his head touched the sky. He rode the first horse, surrounded by flames, holding a blazing sword brighter than the sun. His twilight sword shone so brightly that no mortal could look at it. As they rode across the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge would break into pieces, crumbling beneath their feet. The once vibrant colors would turn to ash and soot. The rainbow would never appear again. Loki, too, escaped his chains due to the earthquakes. He stood at the helm of Naglfar, the largest warship ever built from the nails of the dead. In some versions, the ship is made from the dead's toenails, but it's just as creepy. Naglfar anchored in the sea where Jormungandr had passed one, where only the dead, rotting sea creatures drifted. Loki may have steered the ship, but he was not its captain. The ship's captain was Hrym, the king of the frost giants, tall, hostile to humans and gods, especially Thor. The other frost giants followed Hrym into the final battle. Speaking of Hrym, there's a famous story about him fishing with Thor. Essentially, the gods showed up at the hall of the greatest sea god, Aegir, demanding a feast. Aegir didn't want to throw a party for the gods, thinking that after the feast, his family would have to clean up after them, but he couldn't refuse. So he demanded that the gods provide a cauldron large enough to brew beer for everyone. The gods, having nothing with them, were stuck, so Tyr suggested that Thor go to Hrym, who had a cauldron 3 miles deep. Hearing this, Thor immediately took Tyr and set off with his goats, Gamher and Njensgan. The latter had been crippled by Loki, making it hard for it to walk. When they arrived, Thor was met with a woman with 900 heads, all of them ugly, the last worse than the first. This was Tyr's grandmother. She called out to Tyr's mother, another giantess, much more attractive. She fed them the smallest beer barrels, but to Thor and Tyr, they were huge. Tyr's grandmother killed the cattle, skinned them, and put them into a pot. Soon the food was ready. Hrym generously told Tyr and Thor to eat as much as they wanted, thinking these small guests wouldn't eat much. But Thor ate 2 whole cows, enough to feed Hrym's family for days. Hrym was shocked, for even giants couldn't eat like that. Noticing things were awkward, Thor changed the subject and invited Hrym to go fishing. Hrym, being an avid fisherman, agreed immediately. Thor, though, claimed to be an expert fisherman, even though he had never fished before. They agreed to meet at the docks at dawn. The next day, Hrym came prepared with bait. He refused to share it with Thor, telling him to find his own in the cow field, specifically in the cow manure. Thor, insulted, was ready to smash Hrym's head in with his hammer, but the cauldron kept him calm. Thor didn't find any worms, but went straight to the largest cow, broke its neck, and stuffed its head into his bag. Yes, Thor's bait was the head of the largest, fattest, and strongest cow. Hrym was rowing his boat out to the bay, and Thor had no choice but to jump into the freezing waters to follow the boat. After rowing for a while, Hrym stopped and said they would fish here, but to Thor, this wasn't enough. So Thor grabbed the oar and threw it into deeper, more dangerous waters, specifically the waters of Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Hrym's bait was 2 big fish, which he hooked on the line and cast out. Soon he pulled up 2 massive whales, the biggest Thor had ever seen. Thor praised him and grabbed his own bait. When Hrym saw the head of his beloved cow, his face showed clear anger, but he said nothing. Thor dropped the cow's head into the sea, and boom! It wasn't Michael Jackson, but Jormungandr, the true sea monster, was on the hook. It thrashed and tried to escape, but Thor wasn't letting go, while Hrym was panicking, fearing the boat would capsize. Thor gritted his teeth and pulled it up, his feet crashing through the bottom of the boat. The serpent sprayed poison at them, but Thor dodged it as he had when he was younger and kept pulling. Thor yelled out that he would live on, even with the beast, and the serpent hurt him. It sprayed poison again, this time hitting Thor's shoulder, causing him pain, but not enough to shake his resolve to catch Jormungandr. Meanwhile, Hrym cursed the serpent and Thor, blaming him for the 2 holes in the boat. Hrym was already thinking about a cold, lonely death in the sea, but Thor didn't care much about that. What mattered to him was that the serpent's head was almost within reach, the perfect moment for a mighty blow. But then, whoosh! Hrym's knife cut the fishing line. Jormungandr dove straight back into the deep gray ocean, and Thor could only swing his hammer in vain. That's when Thor noticed the boat was sinking from the 2 holes he had made. Hrym, now desperately bailing water out, and Thor paddled the boat towards shore with all their might. The 2 whales on the bow made it even harder for Thor, but he managed to dock near shore and carry the boat, along with Hrym and the whales, back home. Once there, Thor made it clear that he wanted payment in the form of Hrym's cauldron. Hrym agreed, but his condition was that Thor must smash his cup. Smashing things was Thor's specialty, so he was confident. Later, after they had eaten, Hrym handed Thor the cup, which had just held his beer. If Thor smashed it, he'd get the cauldron. If not, he'd die. The giants around them fell silent, watching Thor intently. Thor grabbed the cup, raised it with both hands, and threw it with all his might at a stone pillar. The cup pierced through 2 columns and lodged firmly in the third, but not a scratch on it. Hrym and the giants began laughing at Thor, but Tyr reminded him that Hrym was stubborn, literally. Thor caught the hint and asked for another try, which Hrym readily agreed to. Thor then jumped and slammed the cup straight onto Hrym's forehead, and the shards fell into his lap. The room fell silent as Hrym cried out. He mourned the loss of his magic cauldron, the one that brewed the best beer for him. But a promise is a promise, so there was no way around it. The problem, however, was that the cauldron was too heavy for Tyr. So Thor turned the cauldron upside down, took it from inside, and lifted it. Tyr thanked his stepfather affectionately, and they both carried the cauldron out to the 2 goats. Just as they were about to hop onto the cart to fly back, a group of multi-headed giants, ordered by Hrym, ambushed them. Thor, still itching to fight after his encounter with Jormungandr, let out a mighty roar and charged at the giants. Tyr joined in. taking down quite a few. By the end of the battle, as Thor was savoring the thrill, Tyr checked to see if Hrym had been among the fallen. Luckily he wasn't, or else his mother would have cried even more. Thor brought the cauldron back to Asgard and went to the feast of the gods. Aegir, seeing Thor had already accomplished so much, refrained from adding any more challenges. So, to satisfy his meal, the thunder god had beheaded the biggest cow, smashed a cup on the king of the ice giant's head, and killed nearly 100 more giants. It's no wonder Hrym despised the gods, especially Thor. Back at Ragnarok, in addition to the frost giant army led by Hrym and the fire giants of Muspel, there was also the army of Hel sent by Loki. These were the ones who had died dishonorable deaths, those whose deaths had been shameful, returning as zombies to fight, determined to destroy everything that once knew love and life on Earth. All of these godslayers were headed toward a battlefield called Vigard. Vigard was a vast field, 100 miles in every direction. Fenrir had been running towards it since breaking free of his chains. Jormungandr glided on the surface of the water, and as it approached Vigard, it started slithering onto the sand, though only its head and the first mile of its body emerged. The rest stayed beneath the sea. Loki's army included Surtur and the fiery children of Muspel at the center, followed by the undead rising from the earth. The frost giants under Hrym stood tall, their feet freezing the ground beneath them. Fenrir and Jormungandr flanked the army, ready to kill any creature that passed by. And as the world destroyers lined up, what were the gods doing? They were sleeping. Yes, you heard that right. Everyone was fast asleep except for Heimdall, the white god and sentry of the gods. Heimdall saw the dark days ahead and finally sprang into action. Heimdall blew Gjallarhorn, the horn once belonging to Mimir, with all his might. The sound of the horn signaled the arrival of the end. The Ragnarok had come. Asgard trembled at the sound of the horn. Even the gods who had been asleep were awakened, grabbed their weapons, and gathered at the base of Yggdrasil by the well of Urd, where they received the advice and blessings of the three Norns. Odin rode his 8-legged horse Sleipnir to the well of Mimir to ask Mimir's head for counsel for himself and the gods. Mimir's head whispered prophecies to Odin, prophecies that would give All-Father hope, even in the darkest of times. The mighty ash tree Yggdrasil shook like a leaf in the wind. The Aesir gods, along with the Einherjar, the noble warriors of Valhalla, donned their armor and rode towards Vigard, the final battlefield. Odin led the charge, wearing a golden helmet and bright, shiny armor. Thor was right beside his father, wielding Mjolnir. When the gods arrived, the battle began. Odin charged straight at Fenrir, now larger than anyone could have imagined. Odin held Gungnir tightly and advanced. Thor hurled his two goats straight at Jormungandr, gripping his hammer, determined to smash its head in. Freyr moved towards Surtur, whose fiery sword was enormous and continued to burn even after missing its target. Freyr fought bravely and courageously, but his sword and armor were no match for Surtur's fiery blade. Freyr was the first god to fall, but not before leaving several wounds on Surtur. One interesting story here is that the sword Surtur uses to kill Freyr once belonged to Freyr himself. When he was young, Freyr secretly climbed onto Odin's throne to gaze upon the world. He looked towards the land of the giants and saw Gerd, a beautiful red-haired giantess. Freyr fell in love and refused to eat or drink. Njordr and Skadi asked him why, and then sent Skirnir, Freyr's servant, to ask for her hand. Skirnir brought gold, silver, and jewels to ask for her, but she refused, as no giantess liked the gods. Skirnir, unable to succeed, threatened to destroy all the giantess's crops with Freyr's sword. Gerd agreed. Overjoyed, Freyr gave Skirnir the sword. Somehow, the sword later ended up in the hands of Surtur. The sounds of battle, the clashing and roaring, were terrifying. The hellhound Garm, though smaller than Fenrir, was a deadly beast from hell. It guarded the gates of hell. Always chained, the earthquakes allowed it to break free. It tore apart any warrior from the gods it encountered. Tyr, the brave god, stood up and fought Garm, but both perished in this battle. Thor finally struck down Jormungandr, fulfilling his wish from their fishing trip. Thor smashed the serpent's skull with his hammer. Thor leaped far from the 9-foot-long head as it fell to the ground, but not far enough. Even in death, Jormungandr's venom sprayed over Thor, turning into a thick black stream. Thor walked 9 steps before painfully gasping and collapsing. The giant killer breathed his last, surrounded by the very creature he had slain. Then came the final combat between Odin and Fenrir. The wolf had become too destructive. It was more dangerous than anything alive, larger than the moon, larger than the sun. Odin stabbed his spear into Fenrir's mouth, but it had no effect. With a single snap of Fenrir's jaw, Odin lost his spear. One more bite, and with a snap and a gulp, Odin, the greatest and wisest god, was gone, never to be seen again. Vidar, the quiet, reliable god, became an orphan god. He rushed in to avenge his father. As Fenrir reveled in his victory over Odin, Vidar kicked the wolf's lower jaw. One of Vidar's feet was in a regular shoe, while the other wore a shoe made from scraps of leather since the dawn of time. This shoe was pieced together from the pieces of leather from the toe and heel of shoes. The gods advised humans to cut any leftover leather from their shoes as it would contribute to Vidar's strength. But don't actually cut your shoes, that would be a mistake. Vidar's shoe held Fenrir's jaw, preventing it from moving. With one hand, Vidar tore open the wolf's upper jaw, successfully avenging his father. On the main battlefield, the gods and the frost giants fought on, trading lives. The army from Hell lay scattered alongside the army from Valhalla. The brave Einherjar warriors were lost forever under the dark sky, never to rise again or feast in the halls of the gods. Loki was the only one left standing, blood-soaked, his face twisted into a smug grin with scarred lips. On the other side, Heimdall stood, still holding his blood-stained sword, Hofud. The two armies clashed, stepping over corpses in a bloody battlefield. Loki taunted, but Heimdall remained calm, indifferent as always. Loki began screaming about the days he spent chained underground, how his beloved wife had to endure poison drops while Loki himself was bound by the entrails of his own son. Loki had kept his sanity waiting for this moment, the moment when he and his perfect children would bring the gods to their end. Heimdall didn't respond but fought harder. Loki, excited to find someone as mad as himself, grew even more intense, thrilled. They recalled the time they fought in the form of two seals, battling over Freya's necklace with Heimdall being the winner. This battle felt more balanced. They fought, slashing at each other until they collapsed beside one another. Loki screamed that he had won, but Heimdall smiled and said that Loki, being nearsighted, couldn't see far enough. Fenrir was dead, but Vidar had avenged his father by slaying the wolf. Not only Vidar, but Vali also survived. Thor was dead, but his sons Magni and Modi lived. They would inherit Mjolnir because they were strong enough and noble enough to lift it. This didn't matter to Loki, though, because for him the world was burning and everything had been destroyed. Heimdall responded with his final breath. He had seen the flames of Surtur but knew they wouldn't reach the World Tree. There, two figures stood, and their descendants would settle on Earth to start anew. This was not the end of the world, but the end of an old era, making way for a new one. Rebirth always follows death. Loki was about to joke again, but even he had no strength left. Surtur raised his blazing sword to the sky, fulfilling his fate. Everything would burn, even the air itself. The world would be cremated by Surtur's flames, and even the seas would evaporate in the fire. The final flames burned brightly, flickering, and then extinguished completely. Gray, black ash fell from the sky, covering the earth like snow. The bodies of Odin, Thor, Loki, Tyr, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and others were nothing but ash. No more armies of the living or the dead. No more dreams of the gods or the bravery of warriors. Dust returned to dust. Soon the sea would reclaim all the ashes, washing everything away. All life was forgotten under the lightless sky, and that is how the world ends, in ash, floodwaters, darkness, and frost. This is the fate of the gods. Essentially, this is the end of the gods, but even after the end, something remains. From the dull gray sea, the earth turns green again. The sun was devoured, but her daughter will replace her to shine brighter and give forth a more youthful light. A woman named Life and a man named Desire for Life step out from the World Tree. They live on the dew of the green earth. They fall in love, and from their love, humanity is born. Asgard is gone, but Idavol will rise in the place where Asgard once stood, glorious and eternal. Vidar and Vali reach Idavol first, followed by Thor's two sons, Modi and Magni, who must lift Mjolnir together, as after Thor's death, it will require two to lift the hammer. Balder and Hod return from the land of the dead. The six of them sit together under the new sun, talking about the mysteries of the past. They discuss whether they could have done things differently and what the outcome would have been. They talk about Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Loki, the one who lived with the gods but was not a god, the one who saved them yet destroyed them. As they talk, Balder suddenly sees something shining in the grass. It's the gods, but in the form of chess pieces. Odin, Thor, Heimdall, Frigga, and Balder. They find other pieces, some beautiful, some not. There's Loki and his children, Hrym and Surtur with their fiery faces. They find all the pieces for a chess set. They place the pieces on the board, and once again, the gods of Asgard face their eternal enemies. Balder smiles, shining brightly, and reaches for the first move. And the game officially begins. And that's the ending of a famous myth. For the people of the North, as well as for people around the world, the end is just another beginning. There are many interpretations about the end of the world. For those in the cold lands, summer is the most beautiful season, not spring. Winter there is very cold, and only summer is the warmest time of the year. During this time, nature thrives, trees grow, and crops flourish. Summer is seen as the season that begins everything. We can easily recognize that Balder, the god of light and the sun, symbolizes summer. That's why Balder is so loved by all. His death, caused by mistletoe, a plant associated with autumn, raises the question of why he returns. Here's my way of thinking. When Ragnarok ends, Surtur's flames burn everything. It's still winter, and ice forms. When the sun reappears, its light melts the ice as if all things are weeping. Without Loki, nothing can stop Balder's return. As for the blind god Hod, I couldn't find any information about his return. If anyone knows, let me know. And that's the story of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods.